So, good afternoon. Welcome to the discussion of a document which has been released by the Government of India, Department of Economic Affairs. The document is titled The Indian Economy, a Review. Basically what government does, it brings out an economic survey just a day before budget. But this year, being an election year, the Government of India has not brought out an economic survey, rather it has brought out a review of last 10 years of Indian economy. And subsequently, after the elections get over, we'll have a full budget, and before that we'll have a full economic survey. So this is basically a review, and it has been divided into two chapters. So the first chapter is like economic survey, it is the overview. The first chapter is the overview of Indian economy, the past, present and future outlook. And the second chapter basically deals in details, in-depth analysis. In-depth analysis in 5 domains. These domains are domestic economy, macroeconomic stability, human resource, the external sector of India, and climate action. And at the end of the review, it has also discussed the economic outlook of India in the medium term, basically in the next 5 years. So we'll be having a discussion, and it also includes various charts, graphs, so as to make sure that the data also speaks whatever has been claimed or what was the specific state of Indian economy before the new government came in, the present government. So it is an analysis based on 2013 till 2023-24, a 10-year period. So we'll be looking one by one to that. So the first chapter itself is Indian economy, past, present and future. So basically it traces India's economic status right since independence till 2014. So what was the theme and how the various decades, how was the growth rate, as well as what were the basic drivers or bottlenecks in the Indian economy. So it starts with post independence period. So it starts with basically 1950 and 60s, 50s and 60s decade. So cumulatively the average growth rate of the period was about 4.1%, and the main reason of low growth rate in the period was all ascribed due to high poverty and low industrial base. Basically, the aim was to reach economic self-sufficiency. At the same time, go for rapid industrialization. So we had various policies like Mahalanobis model. To add to that, we had various others models like Harrod-Domer. So the basic aim was to increase economic growth. But 1960s, we had war with China, 1962, and Pakistan. To add to that, we had drought in the year 66 and 65 itself. So back-to-back drought as well as wars had dragged the total economic growth in that particular decade. And due to low resource mobilization, the government wanted increased taxation. So also they led higher taxes. So this was a period of 1950s to 60s. Now in 1970s, we had another issue, and that also dragged the growth rate to mere 2.9%. And what was that? First, the oil shock, and that was all because of Israel-Arab war, and that led to embargo. What it led to? An oil embargo by Arab oil producing nations. And that embargo led to huge increase in prices of oil. And that was the main reason. 1973 we had this war, and that led to increased oil prices. And to add to that, the devaluation of rupee, or we can say in colloquial terms depreciation, because depreciation is more related with market free floating exchange rate, but at that time we had fixed exchange rate system. So that led to higher import outgo, higher imports and high current account deficit. That was the main issue in that period. Jumping to 1980s, although the growth improved, all because we started removing price controls in terms of licensing and quota. Actually, complete overhaul came post 1991, but we had started doing this in 1980s itself, and all because of there was Gulf crisis in 1990 that led to a complete overhaul of the system that came to be known as new economic policy or LPG reforms. But we had started this in 1980s also. So that also led to public sector revamp. It means those public sector enterprises that were loss making, they were being shut down. But after 1991, we started on a larger scale to make sure that we align with the global economic system. Industrial delicensing also started in that period. Then came the moment of India's connection with global world. So in that period, we started liberalization, privatization and globalization. So we had various reforms in industrial reforms, FDIs were promoted. To add to that, private sector were promoted, and many restrictive trade policies were also abolished at that period. and that also led to removal of complex regulations. So we actually moved away from state owned enterprises, or in colloquial terms we know as PSUs, and we started promoting private enterprises or private businesses, and that led to the growth of Indian economy and also private investment in the Indian economy. So basically all the protectionist measures in terms of import substitution or isolation from global economy, what we did, we moved away from these because we thought that India was not getting benefited by cutting off itself from the economic scenario that was happening in those periods, because China was growing at a rapid rate. In 1979, basically what happened, in 1979 China opened its economy and the GDP of India and China was relatively comparable at that time. But after 1979, China just exploded in terms of growth rate, all because many MNCs started shifting their bases to China and China started becoming factory of the world. But at the same time, India was still, you can say, inward looking economy. India was still inward looking economy, and that led to what everyone says, a Hindu growth rate. So we broke that shackles and we introduced that reforms triggered by the BOP crisis or the balance of payment crisis, and the fruits were easily visible because the growth rate started picking up and it moved above 6%, all because of the choices that were brought in, the consumption boom that started, and also at the same time many companies started coming to India, and that boosted the investment climate of India. And this was not a hiccup. जो इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ था वो एक सस्टेन्ड तरीके से स्टार्ट होना लगा, and in the last 28 to 30 years we have seen that the economy is growing relatively at 6.5% CAGR, the compounded annual growth rate. It has been a good growth rate, and that is why we have moved from a low income economy to a low mid income economy, and we aspire to be mid income economy. And because of the stability in the Indian economic macroeconomic framework, we had a good amount of capital inflow. We'll look into it, how that capital inflow in terms of FDIs and FPIs boosted India's investment image. Then there was a shock post that, and that was known as global financial crisis, all led by an asset boom, and that was also artificially created, and that led to exposure of vulnerabilities in India's economic structure, and that was actually manifested by high inflation and depreciation of Indian rupee, and that led to transformative changes, and that also actually led to high NPAs because many of the companies defaulted on their loans, and that led to twin balance sheet problem. We'll see into this in the subsequent slides, and because of that we were in a position of policy paralysis, because we were not in a position to go for transformational changes, all because our macroeconomic framework was not sound, and we had also there was also an issue of running that for foreign exchange reserves to a unprecedented lower level and a repeat of BOPs. That is why RBI as well as the government of India initiated a prudent monetary as well as fiscal policies. Then this period 2009 to 2014, that was the period of high inflation, and that was also known as a period of twin deficits. Twin deficits in that means the deficit in terms of government's balance sheet that is known as the fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficits were also high. To add to that, the current account deficit was also very high. So it meant that we were importing more, and that led to depreciation. That also created a spiral effect, and our balance of payment created depreciation of rupees. And there was also problem of twin balance sheet problem. This stretched till 2018 because at the same time corporate profitability went down. Corporate profitability went down, and also NPAs of bank increased. So it led to more companies getting defaulted because companies were not in a position to repay back their loans, and at the same time that led to higher NPAs, and because of lower demand the profitabilities also went down, and that led to twin balance sheet problem. So what did actually government learn from this? So lessons from the growth experience till 2014. The first one was transition from closed to open economy. Earlier, what our policymakers thought that if we try to isolate our economy from global competition, we will be able to support our domestic economy. But that backfired because our domestic industry were less competitive. So because of this isolation from global economy, our domestic industry was not allowed to compete with global benchmarks, and that led to inferior quality of goods, and that led to lower growth, lower industrial growth. So we thought that we need to adapt economic policy to the changing global realities. We cannot be like that. The world is moving towards globalization and we are moving towards isolation. So we needed to align with the global change in the economic order system. And at the same time we had liberalization of FDI. Foreign direct investment was order of the day. So if any economy needed to grow, it needed to open its economy for foreign investors to come in and start operating in their domestic country, and also follow liberal trade policy and promote industries, and to add to that promote private industries, because private capital was very important. The second lesson was in continuation of first, that shift from public to coexistence of public and private investment. It is not like only public sector enterprises would be operating in the economic space. We wanted public as well as private sector to cooperate as well as compete with each other, so as to make sure that the efficiency in the Indian economy increases. That was the main idea. So private sector emerged as major growth drivers, led by IT sector. And we are the highest in terms of IT exports from any country, because our human resource and service based exports are highest from IT sector. So there was a need to take a balanced approach between public and private investments. At the same time, we also understood that we need to move towards technology, we need to adopt technology, because technology would lead to higher economic efficiency. Higher economic efficiency. And if economic efficiency increases, it would lead to economic transformation, and that was the need of the hour, because we wanted Indian economy to grow from a low income economy to a middle income and transiting towards a high income economy. That was our long term goal. So we thought of ensuring self-reliance in strategic sectors, but those self-reliance was not at the cost of just isolating from the world. That was not allowed. Isolation was not promoted. It was more towards creating domestic infrastructure with the help of private sector, and also starting to accept foreign investments in India, because they had an advantage of technology. So we collaborated with them for technology transfers. For technology transfer. Now, what was the challenge for the new government that formed in 2014? First, the growth rate was subdued. It was below 5%. So, there was a situation of stagflation at that time. Stagflation, wherein the growth rate was very low and inflation was very high. So it left Indian economy in a situation that neither monetary policy could work nor the fiscal policy. So it needed certain transformational changes in the economic system. At the same time, there was high food inflation, because food being an essential commodity, so it led to overall higher inflation regime, and that persisted for quite some time. Then there was missed target of subsidy, missed targeting. All because of the populist measures, we were continuing with subsidies in fuels, fertilizers, food. So what government thought that we need to rationalize these subsidies, because these were actually eroding the capital base, capital expenditure potential of the government, because higher outgo of budget was towards these revenue expenditures. So it needed certain reforms in the subsidy regime. Then there was a thought of ensuring that project implementation, contract enforcement, and prudent fiscal management was need of the hour, because to ensure the ease of doing business, suppose any company wants to invest in India, they'll try to look at these fundamentals, whether the projects are getting approved, at the same time getting completed in time or not, whether government has that fiscal space or not, or if the government is running high debt to GDP ratio, then it means that government's interest obligations are very high. So it in a way hits the growth rate. Then there was a need to ensure a overhaul of the subsidy system towards more targeted subsidy policies, and that was only brought in through technology and digital infrastructure. Digital infrastructure. So that was need of the hour, to ensure that the structural constraints can be overcome and achieve a sustained high economic growth of the order of 8% per year. Now, if we see how in the past decade the transformative growth have actually manifested. So if we see that the structural reforms and fundamental macroeconomic fundamentals, we'll see that we have achieved a growth rate of above 7% for the past 2 years, and that is consecutive. At the same time, RBI in its policy review right today itself has projected repeat of that growth rate of 7% plus for the next fiscal year, that is 2024 and 25. So what was an issue for many developed economy, that they were not able to recover from the pandemic led economic collapse. Our economy quickly recovered, and it was termed as a V-shaped recovery. So it was kind of a swift and impressive post-pandemic recovery. Then at the second, we'll see that the employment and social welfare measures has led to actually decline in the urban unemployment rate, and they are quoting at the lowest levels of 6.6%. Unemployment rate is number of person unemployed upon labor force into 100. That is the unemployment rate. So how could we do that? We also ensured that we bring in, the government started Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Ann Yojana so as to make sure that the food security is ensured, and they have extended this scheme for the next 5 years, ensuring food security for more than 80 crore population, and that is one of the largest food security schemes in the world. Then to ensure employment, we had Atmanirbhar Bharat Rozgar Yojana or Rozgar Abhiyan, that ensured that new subscription to employees provident fund organization is ensured. This created formal employment. This ensured formal employment in the economy. So it was not only the social sector, but also employment was catered through this scheme. No, that has not increased regularly. See, at that pandemic, we had abrupt increase in unemployment. But after pandemic, we have seen that the unemployment rate has gone down. So if we see for the last 3 years, unemployment rate has considerably gone down. But if we consider that 2020 period, it increased drastically. So we try to eliminate that particular year. Then to add to that robust infrastructure, robust economic growth, any GDP is a multiple of C plus I plus G plus X minus M. That means consumption, investment, government expenditure and net export. So government started spending more, and that also propelled fixed capital formation also. That also propelled fixed capital formation. So how was it ensured? By higher infra spending. Higher infrastructure spending. You will come to know in the subsequent part that India has actually increased in the budget itself. India has increased the proportion of capital expenditure to the total proportion of budget announced in the last 2 years. And we actually reached a record 37 kilometers per day of road building in the year 21-22. Now, if we see the social we had this physical infrastructure. Now, if we try to see the social infrastructure, how was education catered to? We'll come to know that the number of universities have increased from 720 to more than 1100 in the last 10 years. And to add to that, the enrollments of girls in higher educational institutions have reached to 48%. So we can say that there is a near parity in terms of girls and boys, or males and females in higher educational institution, and this has been approved, or this has been categorically mentioned in the All India Survey on higher education. Now, if we see how was the impact of the global pandemic because of the coronavirus, it led to a contraction of GDP. That meant India's GDP reduced by 5.8% in the year 2020-21 because of near zero economic activity in the first quarter. That is April, May, June of the year 2020, we had near still no economic activity, and that led to a contraction in the GDP. But because of various prudent fiscal as well as monetary, and to add to that, health measures like free vaccination, we were able to swiftly recover. And not only recover, we are thriving because this has been approved not by our own central bank, the RBI, but at the same time global financial institutions like IMF and World Bank have stamped this fact that India's economy is in the Goldilocks zone, and it is poised to grow at about 7% for the next 7 to 8 years. And that is a good thing, that shows India's economic resilience. But at the same time, how India actually tried to ensure that they manage crude oil prices. So what they did, they tried to increase their import from those countries which were offering a better prices, despite having an issue of sanctions which were threatened by some of the advanced economies. But India tried to protect its own interest, and they went ahead and bought oils, and that led to India retail prices getting stable or constant for the past 1.5 years, all because of the effective crude oil price management in terms of the supply, and also how the duties and excise duties have been added or subtracted on it. Now, to add capital expenditure, not only the government of India took the measure in its own hand, it also prompted the state governments to increase their capital expenditure. How? By providing 50 years interest-free loans on capital investments to improve road infrastructure, electricity, and rural infra. So it was a kind of two-way capital investments. We'll come to know that even the public sector enterprises also increase their investments. So that led to higher capital expenditure. Now, that was the overview of everything that happened in the past 10 years. Now, in the chapter 2 part, we'll see how categorically everything got introduced, or we can say how the data speaks all the claims. So the document talks about the resilience of Indian economy. Why? Because India's even the world economy saw a contraction. It saw a contraction. Every GDP, every economy saw a contraction in the COVID year. But India was able to swiftly recover back to the economic growth path. But even China is not able to recover or sustain the growth which it had enjoyed in the pre-COVID years. So that is known as resilience. Basically, resilience means to bounce back from lows. And in economic terms, how those macroeconomic indicators were now again propelling India toward high or sustained economic growth. You will come to see how these things have actually manifested. So in nutshell, if we see that the manifestation can be seen in terms of 2 consecutive years of 7% plus growth rate, and today itself it has been said by RBI that it would be 7% again in 2024-25. So this is what we known as Goldilocks period for India's economy, wherein the inflation is under control, but at the same time the growth rate is also keeping momentum. So high growth rate and low inflation is what will propel India towards 5 trillion and subsequently to a developed country status by 2047. That is the aim of the Indian government. At the same time, if we see the e-way bill generation, what is that e-way bill generation? It is a bill that is necessary for interstate movement of goods. Movement of goods, and minimum, if the consignment value is over rupees 50,000 or more, then an e-way bill has to be generated to make sure that there is swift movement of goods from one state to another, and it has shown a very high growth rate in terms of numbers. To add to that, the cargo volumes that is being carried through the railways as well as ports are also seeing increased numbers, and even our air travel has exceeded that pre-pandemic levels. And if we see the air travels has again reached, and it is surpassing that 15 crore year mark in the number of passengers that are using air travel as a source of transportation, as a medium of transportation. And we have also planned increasing purchase of aircrafts. Purchase of aircrafts, civilian aircrafts, currently it is 700 plus in India, and we have ordered more than 1100 aircrafts, and that is the highest in the world. We have ordered more than 1100 aircrafts that would be supplied in the subsequent decades. So that shows that our air travel as a medium of, or as a mode of transportation is gaining pace, and what government has envisaged about regional connectivity scheme and ensuring that common man can also use air travel, it is showing the result. Now, how were some of the policies that were actually undertaken? One was smart COVID management, and it was through lockdown, vaccination, mass testing and tracing. These were smart COVID management practices that led to India recover swiftly from COVID-induced economic collapse. To add to that, the government of India also introduced Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan package, wherein cash transfers of rupees 500 per month for first 3 months in April, May, June was given to the woman of the family, and to add to that, free ration was also given, and that has continued even right now also. We have the government has extended it for the next 5 years, and that was Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana. So Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana was a part of Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan package. So that part of extending free ration has been extended for the next 5 years also. Now for the MSME sector, all because there was near economic collapse and there was no working capital, what government introduced was emergency credit line guarantee scheme that ensured repayment of debt. that ensure repayment of debt on a softer lines. The government tried to create a corpus which ensured as a guarantee for those loans that were taken from by the MSME sector to protect them from going out of the business. That was the main idea. Then at the same time, if we see, there was an increase in the capex budget, because this is a normal phenomena. What happens that if the government sees that there is a reduction in consumption expenditure, government tries to increase its expenditure on its own on infrastructure, or basically capital investments, capital formation. And that was evident by an increase of more than 35% in capex budget of FY 23-24. So that ensured that the pace of physical assets creation keep on increasing, and this year budget also we have seen an increase of roughly 10% again in the capex budget. To add to that, we also had a proactive inflation management where RBI quickly increased the policy rates. It did not wait for too much, because it knew that there was a sudden demand, and because of the pent up demand there could be more inflation. So what RBI did, RBI quickly increased the policy rates so as to make sure that inflation does not go out of control. Now the chapter 2 actually talks about what I had told you earlier, a 5 broader theme, that is the domestic economy. How has it fared in the last 10 years? We'll see number of graphs showing the improvement in various macroeconomic indicators. To add to that, the macroeconomic stability would also be shown in the subsequent part, and this document talks specifically in depth about these two things. To add to that, how human resource have fared in terms of skill development and employment, we'll be looking at that. Then the fourth theme would be the external sector, about the BOP, foreign exchange reserves, and the investments, FDIs and FPIs. How have this ensured that, how have this fared in the last 10 years? Then at the same time, our NDCs, the nationally determined commitments that we had made in the Paris deal, how have we actually performed on those parameters? We'll see whether we have achieved or we have not. Now the first is the domestic economy. So if we see, again, the real average growth rate has been above 7%, and it is continuing in the, if you plot for FY24, you will see that it is again continuing to 7.2, 7.3%. We had a blip of one negative growth rate of till minus 5.8% in FY 2021, but we have swiftly recovered. And the manufacturing share has been consistently hovering around 17 to 18% of the GVA of the various sectors of Indian economy. At the same time, service sector has improved from 51.1% in FY14 to 55%. That shows that India's service-led economy is actually booming. But the government has ensured that the total growth of manufacturing sector also picks up. And if we see the private final consumption expenditure, so that is nothing but GDP equal to C plus I plus G plus X minus M. That C is consumption expenditure, or PFCE, consumption expenditure, or we can say PFCE, private final consumption expenditure. So it has averaged around 58.4% in the preceding pandemic period. But after pandemic, in FY20, after FY20, we'll see that it has reached or exceeded the 60% mark. So we have shown, that shows that there is a demand in economy. there is demand in economy, and that is also picking up. If there is sustained demand in economy, that would lead to increased supply, and that would demand more jobs and creation of more economic activities in the economy. If we see the demand which has been actually led by, we'll see the role of UPI. The UPI transaction that ensures swift movement of money from one account to another account real time. We'll see that in FY17 it was merely 0.07 lakh crore, and in FY24 it has increased to 143 lakh crore, round about $2 trillion. So if we see, UPI has been a success story, and that has been actually acclaimed globally also. Then comes the e-commerce. All because of the higher digitization that is taking place, there is a demand for e-commerce. People are demanding more goods and services using digital platforms. And it is projected to grow at a CAGR, compounded annual growth rate, of more than 16% in the next 4 years. And there is also a claim by one of the independent policy think tank that the growth rate of India's middle class, the middle class has been referred to as those having an income between 5 lakh to rupees 30 lakh household income yearly. So it is actually, the middle class share was roughly 43 crore in 2021. It is projected to grow to 71 crore in 2031, and that would lead to discretionary spending, because middle class are not only, you can say, consumers of essential goods, they also buy various goods that are non-essentials, that leads to demand of various goods in the economy. And by 2047 it is projected to cross 1 billion people in India. So India would specifically be a high income economy, because the middle class population will grow with time. Now if we see the per capita income, if the economy is rising, whether the per capita income of India is rising or not. If we see that the per capita income in terms of real PCI or gross national income, we see that there is a growth rate of 5.3%. All because India's economy is also increasing at a higher rate, but India's population is also increasing, and that is why the per capita income is not keeping the pace with the increase in economy. The moment India's economy or the India's population stabilizes, will have a higher per capita income growth rate, because the income or the economy would grow at a higher pace then. And this is the data that shows that the per capita income was roughly 72,000 rupees in FY13, and it has increased to rupees 98,000 FY23, and these are real values, not nominal. Real per capita income, not the nominal value. In nominal terms, we have reached more than 1,70,000 rupees yearly, but these are the nominal values to negate of the inflation, price adjusted values. Now the investment led economic growth. What is that investment? So if we see that investment is nothing but that the same thing, C plus I plus G plus X minus M. If we see that I, it is the investment. What is the proportion of investment as compared to the total GDP? So if we see that it has been broken into 3 phases. What are the phases? In the FY5 or the 2004-5 to 2011-12, we had an unsustainable credit boom, and that was all because money was cheap, India was growing at a very high rate, but inflation was also very high. That led to, if you see in the next slide, you will see that led to high NPA levels, because those things were unsustainable, and that was why there was a balance sheet repair for the corporates as well as banks, and they were discouraged to spend more. So the total GDP investment as a proportion of GDP started declining with time, because there was and repair in terms of the, and because of higher NPAs we had repair. बहुत ज़्यादा NPA बढ़ गया, प्रॉफिटेबिलिटीज लोग नहीं बढ़ रही थी, अचानक से डिमांड लगा कि कोलैप्स हो रहा है, प्रॉफिटेबिलिटी का बहुत से कंपनी डिफॉल्ट करने लग गई. जब डिफॉल्ट ज़्यादा हो गया तो फिर बैंक्स को लगा कि वी नीड टू मेक श्योर कि हमारे जो प्रोविजनिंग कॉस्ट है बहुत ज़्यादा बढ़ने लग गया प्रोविजन का, और NPAs बहुत बढ़ने लगे, तो बैंक वे डिस्करेज टू लेंड मोर, तो दैट लेड टू लोअर इन्वेस्टमेंट. बट आफ्टर FY21 what we are witnessing, it is again picking up, all because we had a repair work that went for 4 to 5 years, wherein जो corporate balance sheet हो या banks का जितना भी capital बढ़ाया गया उनके losses को बोला गया कि आप loss को write off ना करके loss को provision करो, जिस provision करने के कारण उनका losses initially बहुत कम रहा, और अब उनके पास profitability इतनी है कि वो फिर से इन्वेस्टमेंट का या फिर से वो लोन देना स्टार्ट कर रहे हैं, जिस कारण से फिर से हमारा इन्वेस्टमेंट एज अ प्रोपोर्शन ऑफ जीडीपी इज अगेन शोइंग एन अपवर्ड ट्रेंड. दैट हैपेंस इन एन इकोनॉमी, एक साइक्लिक सिस्टम होता है. नाउ इफ वी सी टोटल कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर इंक्लूड्स सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट, स्टेट गवर्नमेंट and PSUs. If we see that total capital investment has increased from 5.6 lakh crore rupees to 18 lakh crore rupees in the last 10 years. So it includes capital expenditure by government, grant for capital assets creation that is given to state government by the central government, and to add to that resources of public enterprises, how they use. There are many companies like Tata, like SAIL or BPCL, Bharat Petroleum, they also start increasing their capital investment by increasing plant capacity or creation of new plant, नया plant लगाएंगे, NTPC होगी तो नया power plants लगाएंगे. That also leads to capital investment. So it has increased from 5.6 lakh crore to 18.6 lakh crores in the last 10 years. So roughly about 3 times increase in last 10 years. Now if we see that capital investment is not only restricted to the government part or the corporate part, even households have actually started investing more in real estate. So if we see that the gross fixed capital formation has real estate investments also, real estate investments. How houses are being bought by retail buyers or people or middle class societies, they are also starting buying, they were started buying real estate, because of real estate crisis was there in the period FY13 to FY20, wherein the average prices went down. That discouraged the total investment in real estate sector, and that was period of stagnation in real estate sector. But post COVID, what we are witnessing, that again prices have started to increase, and that has led to increased demand for housing, and that is getting witnessed through increased number of buyers for houses. And if we see bank credit, how banks are actually financing those real estates, the number of loans, housing loans are also increasing, and it is consistently getting increased from 4.5% to 8.7%. There was a period where there was a stagnation, all because of COVID, and the moment the COVID was overshadowed, again that it has started picking up. So bank credit for housing as a percentage of GDP. So the more banks start lending to house real estate, people would start buying more houses, and that would mean there is more demand, construction of houses, and that would demand more labor, more demand for cement and other specific industries. So housing as a sector is one of the largest employer as well as one of the largest contributor to the GDP as a whole. So that is why there is always a good connection in terms of if the houses are rising, demand for houses are rising, there would be an proportionate increase in the GDP also. And that is also what happened with China. China में जब भी कुछ प्रॉब्लम होता है ना, चाइना हाउस बहुत बनाना स्टार्ट, शहर बनाना स्टार्ट कर देते हैं, all because it increases demand for labor and demand for various other industry like steel, cement, many other things. बट पोस्ट कोविड क्या हुआ है, वहाँ हाउसिंग बबल से क्रैश हुआ है प्राइसेस. व्हाट पीपल आर थिंकिंग, पीपल आर नॉट अफोर्डिंग पेमेंट ऑफ लोन्स, उनको लोन्स नहीं पे कर सकते हैं. इस कारण से जितनी भी हाउसिंग की जो बड़ी बड़ी रियल एस्टेट कंपनीज थी, दे आर गेटिंग बैंकरप्ट. एक एवरग्रांड क्राइसिस हुआ था. एवरग्रांड एक बहुत बड़ी रियल एस्टेट फर्म है चाइना की, जहाँ चाइना में वो लोन पे नहीं कर पाई थी, एंड दैट मेंट कि वो डिफॉल्ट कर गए. जब मोमेंट डिफॉल्ट हुआ, वहाँ हाउसिंग प्राइस का अचानक से बबल क्रैश किया. और गवर्नमेंट इज थिंकिंग हाउ टू अगेन स्टार्ट, हाउ टू पुश दैट थिंग अगेन, क्योंकि अगर वो हाउसेस बनना बंद हो जाएंगे तो बैक साइड से पीछे जितने भी एम्प्लॉयमेंट है वो भी अनएम्प्लॉयड होने स्टार्ट हो जाएंगे. इवन इन इंडिया, अपार्ट फ्रॉम एग्रीकल्चर, हाउस कंस्ट्रक्शन ऑफ हाउसेज एम्प्लॉयज वन ऑफ द लार्जेस्ट in terms of number of persons employed in any sector. Housing is one of that sector. तो हाउस का डिमांड अगर नहीं ज़्यादा रहेगा तो मैसिव अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट इंडिया या किसी भी कंट्री में आ सकती है. दैट इज़ वाई एनी गवर्नमेंट ट्राइज टू प्रोमोट हाउस बिल्डिंग, एंड दैट इज़ वाई दे केम अप विथ प्रधानमंत्री आवास योजना. दैट इज नॉट ओनली केटरिंग टू बिल्डिंग योर ओन हाउस, दैट ऑल्सो केटर्स टू रेजिडेंशियल हाउसिंग अपार्टमेंट्स. एक पर्टिकुलर लिमिट होता है, 40 लाख के अंदर अगर आपने खरीदा है, यू विल गेट कैपिटल लिंक सब्सिडीज, एंड दे आर ऑल्सो ट्राइंग टू एक्सटेंड दिस. इन दिस बजट दे आर थिंकिंग ऑफ कमिंग अप हाउसिंग स्कीम फॉर, और यू कैन से कैपिटल सब्सिडी स्कीम फॉर मिडिल क्लास ऑल्सो. जैसे प्रधानमंत्री आवास योजना लो इनकम ग्रुप के लिए, और मिडिल क्लास के लिए भी वो चाह रहे हैं कि हाउसिंग स्कीम इस तरह का लेके आए जहाँ पे जब वो लोन लेंगे दे विल बी गिवन सर्टेन सब्सिडीज दैट वुड प्रमोट buying houses on loan, and that would create more credit in the loan sector, this banking sector, because house is a secured loan. House is a secured loan, so banks have a lower exposure of that particular loan getting defaulted. If a person defaults on that particular loan, it is backed up by a collateral, that is the house that has been pledged, and that is why it is a good signal for the economy, because banks balance sheet also increases. At the same time, it also creates demand in the economy. Now the agricultural policy. So the main idea is agricultural growth rate also increases, but at the same time food security is also maintained. It is not कि prices बढ़ा देते हैं, और we can also increase prices, but at the same time what happens कि affordability or food availability can go down. Food availability can go down. So that is why it has to make sure that कि balance is there between agricultural growth rate as well as there is a food security that also happens in sync with that. So agriculture as a whole contributes to 18% of India's gross value added in terms of GDP. So agricultural growth rate between FY05 to FY14 was 3.4%, and it has increased to 3.7%, all because of various schemes like PM Krishi Sinchai Yojana and many other capital investments that have been propelled in the agri sector, and that has led to increased agri growth rate. To add to that, we have a record food production in terms of the volume and that is 329 million tons that has been produced, the food grains. We are talking about the food grains, not the horticultural crops like fruits and vegetables. And average, if we see the average, it is about 290 million ton for the preceding 10 years, which was about 233 million tons if we go between FY14 to FY05. So what we can see that whatever the agri policies has been, it has led to increase in food production. At the same time, it has also made sure that the GVA of agriculture increases and there is a sustained growth rate in the agriculture sector. To add to that, if we see that the agri exports of agri produce has reached rupees 4.2 lakh crores, and one of the highest contributor has been basmati rice. Basmati rice has been one of the largest contributor of the agri exports from India. Then the MSP issue, what government has decided, although they have not categorically mentioned it in the policy documents itself, what government has decided that whenever any MSP has to be declared or by the CCEA, it is roughly based on the margins, and that margin is 50% above the weighted average cost of production. So whatever the weighted average cost of production is for the food grains, MSP has been set above that value, and that value is above 50%. So if the cost is rupees 100 for wheat, MSP is set at rupees 150, so that MSP itself becomes a remunerative price for the farmers, so that the farmers are eager to sell their produce to the government, and that ensures agricultural production. To add to that, also food security in long term. Then if we see how has been the schemes which have actually contributed to that increase in agricultural growth rate. So one is PM Kisan, where a direct cash transfer is given out, and that is rupees 6,000 in 3 equal installments, and about rupees 2.8 lakh crores have been transferred to more than 11 crore farmers or the beneficiaries in the last 3 to 4 years. Similarly, we have come to know that Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana has also ensured about rupees 1.5 lakh crores claims getting paid to more than 55 crore farmers to recover their losses. In terms of adverse weather conditions. Now, if we talk about that eNAM platform, that is National Agri Market Platform, then we'll come to know that the total number of mandis that have been actually connected with that agricultural market has increased from 250 when that particular eNAM as a mission was, or as a scheme was brought out, and it has increased to more than 1300 by 2023, and the transaction values which has also increased roughly from 0.3 lakh crores to more than 3 lakh crores. That is an increase of more than 10 times. So that is more than 10 times the volumes that are getting traded through eNAM platform. eNAM is nothing but a tradable platform that is electronically traded for produce between farmers from one country, from one place. They can sell their produce to another place. Now, if we see the industrial sector, then we'll come to know that in the FY10 to 14, the growth rate was averaging around 5.5%, and it has picked up and it is now averaging about 7.5% before pandemic. So that shows that whatever the industrial policies that have been taken up, it is showing certain positive results, and one of that was the Make in India initiative, and another one, largely post COVID, they have come up with PLI scheme, or the production link incentive schemes. So what is a PLI scheme? That is production linked incentive schemes, wherein there are many sectors, specifically in the 14 specific sectors, government tries to give capital subsidy for incremental sales. That means if the sales at a particular base year, suppose it was March 2020, it was X, and if it increases by certain amount, then based on that particular incremental sales, of 4 to 6% capital subsidy is given, and the total outlay of the scheme is rupees 1.97 lakh crores, and it has led to 176 MSME being direct beneficiaries, because many industries, they take certain things as raw materials or intermediate goods from MSMEs that benefit those MSMEs also. To add to that, it has led to more than rupees 1.07 lakh crores of investment coming into India's manufacturing sectors, and that has led to increase in production or sales to the tune of more than rupees 8 lakh crores. And to add to that, it has also created more than 7 lakh jobs. So all in all, it is looking like this scheme has been a hit, and the government has thought of taking this PLI scheme. It is being pegged to be the next industrial policy. An industrial policy, a holistic, comprehensive industrial policy is long due. All what India brought out was National Manufacturing Policy in 2011 or 2011, but that was specifically for manufacturing sector. But PLI scheme is pegged to be upgraded to a industrial policy. Now, if we see the startup economy or the startup ecosystem, will come to know that more than 1 lakh startups have been founded or have started operations in India. And it has created more than 12 lakh jobs. So the multipliers in terms of employment multipliers of startups has been positive. And the government have also started many schemes to promote it. One is PM Vishwakarma, that is end-to-end supports mechanism for traditional artisans. So more than 48 lakh enrollments have been concluded till December 2023. To add to that, there was Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana that caters to non-corporate non-farm enterprises. So more than 25 lakh crores worth of loans under 3 heads: Shishu, Kishore, Tarun, up to rupees 50,000, rupees 50,000 to 5 lakh, and this Tarun is 5 lakh to 10 lakh. Loans have been sanctioned under the Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana. Now if we see how has been the logistics cost, and that is one of the highest parameter in terms of shifting businesses, specifically manufacturing bases to India. We have seen that although the cost of logistics is high in India, but that logistic cost is going down, and there is an overall decrease of 1% of GDP in the last 10 years, and that is a substantial value, because the moment India's logistics become 8% to 9% specifically on a sustained basis, and that goes below that, if they go below it, so it becomes a favorable manufacturing destination. So if we see the reduction in logistics cost for trucks post implementation of GST, will come to know that the number of kilometers that they are able to travel is more. Earlier it was roughly 222 kilometers pre-GST, now they are able to travel more than 350 kilometers per day. So what is the outcome of that? If more travel can be done by a particular truck, then that particular truck can be used for more transportation of goods, so turnaround time is less. That leads to efficient utilization of capital assets. At the same time, the cost of logistics is actually moving down, that is going down with time, and that has been the success of GST. At the same time, a huge infrastructural development and logistics related national logistic policies specifically have been brought out to make sure that India becomes a favorable destination for large scale manufacturing. India becomes a favorable destination because why? Because MNCs are actually thinking about China +1 policy, wherein they do not want to abandon China completely, but they want to shift some of their manufacturing base from China to some another country, and India is projecting itself to be one of the best manufacturing based destination. Now in terms of digital infrastructure and delivery of services, we'll see that India's digital public infrastructure or DPI, that is also colloquially or generally known as India Stack, that includes digital health, finance, agriculture, public service delivery, so they want to create a network of digital services through a digital public infrastructure, and the core of that has been Aadhaar based authentication, and Aadhaar based authentication in terms of eKYC, Aadhaar enabled payment system, and Aadhaar based authentications like in subsidy or schemes. Aadhaar based KYCs are being used. Similarly, we had this CoWIN app and Arogya Setu for track and test and also disseminate the vaccine certificates. Similarly, we are seeing that due to digitization there is an increased formalization of economy. Basically, Indian economy is getting more formal because all those small shops and all those micro enterprises are also getting themselves registered under GSTs, EPFO, etc. And that is leading to formalization, and that also creates a wider tax base for government to collect taxes, and that creates a more margin for the government to use that revenue for better welfare measures. Similarly, we had a telecom revolution wherein the prices of data dropped from 269 rupees per GB to less than or round about 10 rupee per GB, and making India third lowest tariff in the world after Israel and Italy. So it has led to a tremendous growth of data consumption, not for only personal usage but also for business development. So it has increased and also ensured that everything is getting connected and seamlessly businesses are being promoted, and we can see that many businesses have come on a marketplace model, and also we can see that there is a rise in gig economy. Similarly, we can see that there is an option of cloud kitchen, which is leveraging digital technology and the restaurant culture, and it is also creating businesses for many small entrepreneurs who do not have the capacity to have a physical store, a brick and mortar based system to create businesses. तो basically उसमें क्या है कि जितने भी डिजिटल सिस्टम्स रहेंगे उससे उनको फ़ायदा होता है कि मार्जिन्स भी मिल रहे हैं, उनका बिजनेस का एक्सपोजर भी बड़े बड़े एरिया पे जा रहा है, उनका जो रीच थे एक नॉर्मल रेस्टोरेंट्स का अगर 2 किलोमीटर का रीच है, अगर वो वही चीज़ मार्केट प्लेस डिजिटल मॉडल पे है तो उनका रीच शायद 100 किलोमीटर 50 किलोमीटर तक जाता है. इनफैक्ट मार्केट प्लेस पे तो कभी कभी इफ़ वी आर एबल टू सी देयर आर मेनी स्टार्टअप्स दैट आर कमिंग अप and they are catering to round India, around the world, products are getting moved. Now if we see how banks are creating credit, how the money is getting multiplied, and that is also ensuring that the credit to non-food sector is also growing at a rate of 15%. So if we see that because of the credit boom, there was an reduction in that credit by banks because balance sheet started improving due to capital infusion and asset quality review that RBI had started. Now because of healthier balance sheet and prudent credit norms, again what we are seeing that credit is again picking up. So infrastructure sector, in infrastructure if we see the CAGR, the compounded annual growth rate for credit is increasing at a rate of 4.2%, and MSME sector, which is backbone of India's industrial sector in terms of the contribution to GDP as well as exports and employment, the growth has been impressive in terms of 14.2% if we take the preceding 5 years. Now if we see the NPA levels, we'll come to know that initially the NPA level were down, but the moment there was unsustainable debt growth, there was high levels of NPA, and that led to twin balance sheet problem, all because those companies which had taken loan, they were not in a position to repay back loans, and at the same time that led to a loss for banks in terms of higher provisioning cost. So what RBI did, it came up with asset quality review, wherein banks were told not to write off assets but to provision for those bad assets. So it led to huge losses in banks initially. It led to huge losses in banks. So that was why we had in the FY 17, 18 and 19, 20, the NPA levels were high, all because the banks started recognizing those bad assets and started providing for those loans in terms of higher provisioning cost. And at the same time, those banks that had breached Basel norms of capital adequacy ratio, that were those banks which did not maintain those adequacy ratios, prompt corrective actions was imposed by RBI, wherein they were not allowed to go for further lending till they do not have sufficient capital. And also government started recapitalization of banks, recapitalization of PSUs, and that enabled those banks to come out of prompt corrective action and again start lending, because bank credit is important and that is one of the important parameters for growth rate. More is bank credit, and that is also related with higher economic growth rate, and that was the main idea behind cleaning of balance sheets of banks. Now this IBC, insolvency and bankruptcy code, also led to realization of those stressed assets, because banks were able to unlock those fixed capital that were put in those non-performing assets by way of bankruptcy, wherein some of the biggest companies like Bhushan Steel were sold off to Tata, and banks were able to Tata Steel, and banks were able to recover those loans from that, because that was important for bank. Now after bank, if we come to know about that financial market, specifically the equity and debt market. Equity and debt market, we'll see that India has progressed swiftly. So India's equity market in terms of benchmark returns, specifically Sensex and Nifty, they have returned at a CAGR of about 13.5%. Specifically, that is more or less near to the nominal growth rate which has been experienced by India in the last 10 years. So our benchmark indices have also grown at a very healthy CAGR. To add to that, retail participation post-COVID or during COVID was one of the COVID years, it has started shooting up, all because of the digitization that has taken place, and many discount brokers like Zerodha and Grow, they have streamlined investment in equity market, and it is easier to open demat account, and that is why there is a higher increase in demat account. It has reached nearly 14 crores, and that is a phenomenal growth rate of 536%. So more than 5 times number of demat accounts have actually increased. To add to that, if we see the capital raised from equity market by startups and many other companies which have gone public or which have raised IPOs and FPOs, we'll come to know that more than 1,000 companies have cumulatively gone public, but more than 1,000 companies have gone public in the last 10 years. At the same time, they have actually raised more than capital worth more than round about 3.9 lakh crore rupees, and that is a good thing because it relieves banks. So financial market gives an alternate medium for these companies to raise money. Either they can go for banks to raise money through loans, or they can choose financial market, but only sound companies are able to raise money, and that creates a good thing, and that also reduces moral hazard. That also reduces moral hazard. Why? Because depositors' money is not getting exposed when equity market route is chosen by those companies to raise capital. At the same time, not only the equity market, we can see that debt market is also poised for boom, and there is a sustained inflow of money in bonds, and that has ensured that the yield on bond, that is the return on bond, is stable. Although in advanced economy post COVID, what has been seen that there is a fluctuation in yield. So this shows the resilience of India's financial market, specifically the corporate bond market. And one of the report of CRISIL, one of the rating agency, has shown that the corporate bond market is going to double in the next 7 years. So it will double from 43 lakh crore rupees in the current financial year to more than 100 lakh crore rupees by 2030. So more money is going to come in India through debt route in India's corporate debt market. And that is good for corporates because they will move away from banks to raise money. Now comes the macroeconomic stability, the second theme. So in terms of macroeconomic stability, the first thing that the report points out is the retail inflation. It has actually averaged more or less about 4.2%, and within the 4 plus minus 2% limit of the monetary policy committee, barring the years post COVID. There was certain blip, but previous there we had an inflation of roughly 10% or more, and that was why the growth in those years was also coupled with inflation, and that is not good for the economy. Then food inflation. If we see the data, we will come to know that India's food inflation is roughly in the range of 6 to 7%, whereas even developed economies like US, UK, Germany are showing food inflation that is more than 10 to 12%, and that shows that the prudent action by government of India. And what were those actions? One action was there was strategic focus on supply side initiatives, wherein there was a sustained supply of fertilizers so as to make sure that the food production is not hindered even post COVID. At the same time, there was price monitoring. So whenever there was price fluctuation, India started offloading food or food grains in the open market from the buffer. At the same time, if there was increase in prices of those goods which are not covered under MSP, what government did? It started importing those goods, those food articles. Similarly, there was export regulation, all because of there was a chance of lower food production because of El Nino year. The last year and this year also there is a projection of El Nino, so the export curve was introduced in the rice. Wheat, sugar, so as to make sure that domestic prices do not go out of hand. That was the main idea, to ensure food security for Indian citizens. And also administrative actions like price hoarding, product hoarding, arbitrarily increasing prices by deliberately causing stock outs, those were monitored effectively. These were the regulations that ensured that food inflation does not go out of hand. Then the concept of welfare. So earlier welfare was more top down, now it was more long term oriented. So the main idea was to create a strong foundation for human development. So if human capital is raised, it will automatically start pulling demand. And so if there is more demand, it will lead to sustained economic growth. And how did government do it? The government started spending more on social services like health, education, public facilities, sanitation, urban governance. So these sectors, the investment or the expenditure started increasing, and at the same time capital expenditures on social services has also increased at a very impressive rate of 8.1% CAGR, and that shows the government's commitment to ensure development of not only physical infrastructure and digital infrastructure, but to add to that, there's also a need to increase social infrastructure, and government is eagerly motivated to supplement those. So what were the schemes that were in sync with these welfares? One was direct benefit transfer. So it plugged the leakage or gap. So it ensured efficiency of public good delivery. It ensured the efficiency of public goods delivery. To add to that, we had this jam trinity, that is Jan Dhan, basic savings bank account, Aadhaar based authentication, and mobile penetration. So it led to holistic development and a welfare approach that is long term oriented and outcome based oriented. Then we had one nation, one ration card that lead to portability of subsidized food articles. So if any person who was not residing at the place where his ration card was originally belonging to, he could use the same ration card at a place where he was working, and that helped migrant workers specifically from rural hinterland of UP and Bihar. So they could use the subsidized fair price shop or public distribution system at a place where they are currently working. To add to that, social security benefits in terms of pension was also introduced through Atal Pension Yojana. Then we had PM Jeevan Jyoti Bima Yojana for life insurance of masses, and add to that accidental insurance in terms of Pradhan Mantri Suraksha Bima Yojana. So the insurance premium were very less, and those were in the order of rupees 12 to rupees 20 or less than rupees 300 yearly. So these were ensuring a social safety net for the masses. So if we analyze what was the effect of the new approach to welfare, that was more long term oriented, at the same time outcome based and more on human development, we'll come to know that if this Niti Aayog came up with National Multidimensional Poverty Index, and in the current report, more than 13 crore Indians have escaped the multidimensional poverty. So multidimensional poverty takes poverty from income towards indicator based. From income is not considered more than income, indicators of poverty, which includes 3 dimensions: health, education and standards of living. And within each dimensions there are various indicators on based on the scores on various indicators. Multidimensional poverty is calculated, and more than 13.5 crores Indians have escaped multidimensional poverty between 2015-16 to 2019-21 as per the latest report of the Niti Aayog. And to add to that, if we see the out of pocket expenditure on health, it has also reduced. It was earlier about 63%. Suppose if rupees 100 was the health expenditure or health cost, rupee 63 was borne out by the person who was availing those health. So it made it signaled that all the subsidies and different initiatives on health were not actually doing favorable on ground realities. So, but the moment that welfares have been brought out and we have used, the government has used the new welfare approach, the out of pocket expenditure has reduced to 47% and the government is committed to make it to zero. So everything government wants to make it through public insurance funded through Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, wherein Ayushman Bharat card is being given to people who cannot afford tertiary healthcare. Rupees 5 lakh insurance per family. Rupees 5 lakh insurance, health insurance per family per year. That is the Pradhan Mantri or Ayushman Bharat Yojana. Now, if we see the gender dividend of India, for India, that is the aim for India at 100. That means by 2047, India wants to be a developed economy, and how gender dividend is getting reflected in the last 10 years and what has been the projections. If we see, the government had introduced the Women's Reservation Bill. The name is Nari Shakti Vandan Adhiniyam. So it aspires to reserve 33% seats in Lok Sabha and state assemblies for women, and that would get implemented after the next census. And next delimitation commission comes into picture. Delimitation exercise. So this will get implemented. To add to that, we have Deen Dayal Antyodaya Yojana or National Rural Livelihood Mission, wherein 9 crore women through 83 lakh self-help group. Self-help group is a group of 10 to 12 individuals who come together to form a grouping which has a financial capability to go in for certain economic activities. Even they are also getting linked with banks so that credit can be offered to them. To add to that, we have Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana, wherein more than 40% certificates that have been given under that scheme has been given to women. That shows that the government is committed not only for skill development of males, but the upliftment, economic empowerment of women is also the aim of the government. Similarly, this Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana for rural housing, Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Gramin, if we come to see, the report says, the paper says more than 26% houses are owned by women. It means the papers are in the name of women. So it shows that there is a consistent push by the government to improve asset ownership. for women. And the umbrella scheme to increase the child sex ratio is through Beti Bachao Beti Padhao. Under this, a financial scheme known as Sukanya Samriddhi Yojana, where tax incentives and higher interest rates are provided for deposits made in the name of girl child. Now coming to the employment situation in the past decade. So if we see the labor force participation rate has actually increased from 49.8% to 57.9% in 2023. At the same time, youth unemployment rate has gone down. That shows that the youth is getting skilled enough to join the workforce, and the skill development aim and various schemes are actually doing positive things on the ground. And EPFO net payment enrollment has also increased, more than doubled from 61 lakhs to 139 lakhs, and that shows formalization of economy, formalization of not economy but workforce, because EPFO enrollment ensures there are various schemes under EPFO like pension scheme, insurance schemes, and at the same time there is also corpus, a retiral corpus that is given when the person retires from the job. Then there is a push towards gig economy with the new age startups that are coming up, and they have created more than 77 lakh jobs till FY21. That shows that startups are also not only, you can say, asset creator in terms of financial assets, but they are also creating jobs for the economy. So in this chart, if we see that the data for rural and urban combined, earlier in 2017 it was 49.8% the labor participation rate, now it has gone up to 57.9%. So this is based on the periodic labor force survey. It brings out three sets of data: LFPR or labor force participation rate, the worker population ratio, and the unemployment rate. So unemployment rate has also gone down for rural plus urban from 6% to 3.2% on a total basis. This is clearly evident from the chart that is there. The female labor force participation rate, or female FPR, is actually increased from 2017. It was roughly 23.3% and it has increased to 37%. It shows that more female are joining the workforce, and that is good for economy. One of the data says that if the female labor force participation rate matches man, it will lead to 2% increase in GDP growth rate. That is the potential, that if the female labor force participation, male labor force participation, both are equal, and that will lead to a 2% increase in GDP growth rate. Similarly, what we have seen, that there is a increased feminization of workforce in agriculture. That is evident from the fact that the female ratio in agriculture workforce was 73% in 2017-18. It has increased to 76.2%, roughly 3% increase. And at the same time for males, it has gone down from 55% in 2017-18 to 49.1% in 22-23. That attributes to the feminization of agri workforce. So more females are actually contributing to the farmland. Now if we see the skill development and entrepreneurship, we come to know that 72.6%, roughly 73% of workforce between the age of 15 to 59, that is the age for labor force. It is 73%. So in a way, the National Skill Development Mission has led to certain positive outcome. And to add to that, we have come up with National Policy on Skill Development and Entrepreneurship in 2015. And there was a dedicated ministry which was created, Ministry of Skill Development and Enterprises. And new National Education Policy 2020, which was brought out and was implemented, it specifically and categorically emphasizes on vocational and skill-based courses. So it is not, education is not being restricted to mainly intellectual capabilities, enhancing the intellectual capabilities. It is more towards vocational courses also. So what is the main idea कि जिन लोगों को एजुकेशन में, रिसर्च में नहीं जाना है, जिनको हायर स्टडीज में नहीं जाना है, ट्राई टू इम्पार्ट सर्टेन स्किल्स एंड वोकेशनल ट्रेनिंग टू देम एट अ लोअर एज, ताकि दे कैन बी एम्प्लॉयबल इन द वर्कफोर्स. उससे क्या होगा, by the time they reach the legal age of 18 years, they'll have certain skill sets to contribute productively to the economy, at the same time earn good money because सबको research नहीं करना है, सबको higher order पे education नहीं करना है, और all because there is a poor perception, and the idea is improving the perception towards vocational training, improving the perception towards vocational courses. अभी what is the idea कि सबको engineering करना है, MBA और higher education institutions research करना है, even if the person does not want to. All because if you say कि I have graduated or I have taken diploma from ITI या फिर कोई vocational courses, that is poorly perceived in the society. But the moment NEP, National Education Policy, approves it as the policy of the government, it will lead to improvement in the perception towards vocational training, and that can be readily accepted in the society, and that would lead to higher economic growth also. Unproductive जो खाली ट्रेनिंग या कोई एग्जामिनेशन या उस पर बस बेस्ड है, उससे बेटर होगा कि लोग कुछ प्रोडक्टिवली इकोनॉमी के लिए कंट्रीब्यूट करें. दैट इज द होल आइडिया. Now the fourth theme is India's external sector. So if we see the export growth, it has seen, we are witnessing two things for exports. One is goods and another is services. So exports in goods is also known as merchandise exports. Merchandise export. So if we see merchandise exports, it has increased by 50% in the last 10 years. So by terms of value, the export growth in merchandise has increased by 50%. And similarly for services, it has been more than 120%. It has more than doubled in the specific time period. And in the year FY23, the merchandise export reached 451 billion USD, and that was the highest ever export, and that was why our trade deficit went down and it led to cushioning on the current account deficit. And the target is under the trade policy which has been brought out, the new trade policy is to reach $2 trillion worth of export by 2030. That is the idea. Trade means goods and services. That is the idea. So more than double. That is the main idea. Remittance. If we see the remittance, remittance is the transfer payment by individuals who work in another country. So it has reached 125 billion USD, and India is the largest recipient of trade remittance in the world by a huge margin. The second one is 67 billion, it is China, so it is more than roughly double, and it is expected to reach 135 billion USD, and that leads to increase in foreign exchange reserves, because foreign exchange reserves is a balance of capital account and current. Basically BOP is a thing which balances itself, but whatever is the surplus in capital account or the current account, that is transferred to foreign exchange reserves, and that is why our foreign exchange reserves have also risen to more than 620 billion USD. That we will deal in the subsequent slides. So in terms of FDI inflow also, so what is BOP? BOP is a balance sheet. It always balances, but whatever is the surplus or deficit, it gets reflected in the another account that is maintained, and that account is foreign exchange reserves. If there is a surplus, the surplus amount is given to or added to the foreign exchange reserve, or if there is a deficit in both capital and current added together, then some money has to flow from that FER reserve, foreign exchange reserves, to balance the balance of payment. That is the main idea. So if we see FDI inflows, so cumulative FDI inflows have been about 305 billion USD if we compare FY05 to FY14. So preceding the new government took control, so what was the FDI inflow for the 10 years period before that, and the FDI inflow has increased to roughly 600 billion USD the moment the government took control, the new government formed. Now if we see the rupee dollar exchange rate, we'll come to know that between 2009 to 2014, rupee appreciated from rupees 45 per USD to rupees 60 per USD, and that was an increase of more than 33% in that period. But in the last 10 years, that has not increased. So in the last 5 years itself, in 2009 to 14, it increased by more than 30%. But in the last 10 years only, it has increased from 60 to 80. So the rate of increase of rupee vis-a-vis dollar has gone down. So it is roughly 4 to 5% now. Earlier it was more than 7 to 7%. So it has gone down, and that is showing that India's competitiveness in the global market is increasing and India's trade competitiveness is increasing. That is a parameter for gauging the trade competitiveness. Similarly, India's foreign exchange reserves, what is that? It is the surplus that is generated from capital or current account transaction that is transferred to another account, that is known as foreign exchange reserves. So it has reached about 620 billion USD on December 2023, and that has actually improved the foreign exchange to external debt ratio. And what is that? How much amount of foreign exchange is held as ratio to the external debt. So if we see, it is roughly 100%. So it is round about 100% or 98%. So whatever is the foreign exchange reserves we hold, we have the capacity to finance it in a situation. If any crisis happens, we can fund our external debt. So there is a lower probability of default on any loan in foreign currency denomination if anything that goes wrong with the economy. Earlier it was 71.3%, so it has improved considerably, and with the increase in foreign exchange reserve, which is projected to grow at a higher rate, we will be more comfortably placed. Now if we see external debt to GDP ratio, it has improved with time. So lower is the ratio, low ratio signifies better position. So our external debt as a proportion of GDP has reduced from 22.4% to 18.6%. That shows that whatever is the debt that is being taken, that is mostly in the domestic currency and that can be easily financed if the situation arrives. So it gives a cushion for the government, and that is why the government is asking for rating upgrade. India's rating by India's sovereign rating by global rating agencies like Moody's, Standards and Poor's or Fitch has been just above the lowest investment grade, and that is why India is saying, India being 5th largest economy wants a rating upgrade, because the global rating agencies are not actually calculating the comfortable situation India is currently in. Now the climate action part. So what is that? India announced its first NDC, nationally determined contributions, at the Paris Climate Agreement or the COP15 of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So India pledged 3 things. One was to add non-fossil fuel installed capacity, electricity capacity, to raise it to 40% by 2030. That was one commitment. Second was to add a carbon sink of roughly 2.5 to 3 billion tons by increasing forest cover. And third was reducing emission intensity of GDP. The moment GDP increases, how is the increase in intensity, or how is the increase in emission, and that has to reduce. So the pledge was to reduce it by 33 to 35%, to reduce it to 33 to 35% reduction of that by 2030 from the 2005 levels. And if we see the performance, the first is overachieved. We have had claimed that we'll achieve it by 2030, but by November 2023 we have surpassed that target, and we have reached a level of 44%, and it was earlier round about 32%. Now this has led to an additional increment of about 80 gigawatt of installed capacity. So earlier it was 80%, now it has reached to 187%, so more 187 gigawatts. So what is the idea? Basically 102 gigawatt of additional non-fossil fuel based electricity capacity has been added to India's electricity generation capacity. Similarly, we are nearing that 2.5 to 3 billion. We have already reached the 2 billion ton of carbon dioxide 2 equivalent. We had placed it at 2.5 to 3 billion tons of CO2 equivalent, and we are nearing to it. So on that front also we are doing a good progress. And in emission intensity, we have already achieved that 33% mark by 2019 itself. That shows that India is totally committed towards a more sustainable development, rather than a more sustainable development, ensuring climate as well as economic growth go hand in hand. That is the main idea. So if we see how has been the solar energy push, we'll come to know that the total installed capacity of solar powers has increased from 2.63 gigawatt to 72 gigawatt by November 2023, and that is a commendable achievement, and we have planned to augment it to a higher level. By 2030, we plan to increase to 500 gigawatt of renewable energy, and solar is one of the largest component of that capacity augmentation. And we have also increased investment through PLI in solar photovoltaic or PV module manufacturing. So PV module is nothing but which is used in solar based electricity generation. So what we have thought, we have started to increase we have thought of increasing the production of high efficiency PV modules in India itself and to reduce dependence on imports, because India's future fuel is solar based hydrogen, that is green hydrogen. So it needs solar energy, and to increase solar based electricity we need domestic manufacturing of PV modules. We do not need to be on a dependence of certain countries which control the PV module manufacturing. And we have also augmented, we have also brought up this budget, the recent budget which was announced on 1st of February. It has announced a new scheme known as PM Suryodaya Yojana that aims to increase dramatically the rooftop solar energy through capital investment and also through incentives in terms of free electricity up to certain units of consumption. Similarly, the government of India introduced PM Kusum to promote off-grid solar pumps and solar based electricity generation from farmland. So basically what is the idea? If a particular farmland, if the farmer is not in a position to increase production, crop production, the government gives incentives to use that particular farmland for solar electricity generation by way of installing solar modules, and in a way that creates electricity, a clean source of electricity, and that can be sold to the distribution companies and it can increase income for the farmers. So it is a two-way thing, a win-win situation. Similarly, the government of India has introduced Mission Life, that is Mission Lifestyle for Environment, that promotes or nudges individual and community towards eco-friendly behavior to ensure that the energy intensity or the carbon footprint of way of living goes down and the way of living should be more environmentally sustainable. And to increase that, to promote it, they have come up with market based mechanism known as green credit program, wherein eco-friendly behavior will lead to generation of certificates that can be traded for as a money market instrument or a capital market instrument. Similarly, Eco-Mark scheme has also been brought out, which specifically tries to label products in terms of what is the carbon intensity or carbon footprints, so as to promote eco-friendly products among consumptions for consumers. Now, to promote green hydrogen, the government has specifically come up with the National Green Hydrogen Mission, wherein 5 million metric ton of green hydrogen would be manufactured by 2030, and that will be augmented in future dates. And the main idea is to substitute crude oil and be self-sufficient in mobility as well as to move away from crude oil dependence. That is the main idea. Similarly, the government has initiated FAME initiative, that is faster adoption and manufacturing of electric vehicles and hybrid electric vehicles. So that is based on the promotion of EVs, electric vehicles, and hybrid electric vehicles through subsidy regime, wherein if a person buys an electric vehicle, a particular amount of subsidy based on the cost of vehicle is given as subsidy into the bank account. So it is basically a capital subsidy scheme to promote the adoption as well as manufacturing base for EVs and HEVs in India. Now to add to that, there have been various international institutional initiatives. These are institutional initiatives. So what is that? The main idea, first is the Coalition on Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. This coalition on disaster resilience infrastructure, that is led by India, because it has been researched and being given out by many reports that climate induced damages cost more than 300 billion annually to global infrastructure. So basically infrastructure को protect करने में या फिर उनको rebuild करने में या community को develop करने में extra होता है cost. लेकिन अगर हमने पहले से preparedness, if we increase the preparedness part or we create infrastructure that can sustain those disasters. देखो disaster is not possible कि हम उसको डायरेक्ट निगेट कर दे. वी नीड टू अडेप्ट टू इट एंड ऑल्सो मिटिगेट इट थ्रू वेरियस मेजर्स, एंड वन इज थ्रू क्रिएशन ऑफ सोशल कैपेसिटी बिल्डिंग एज वेल एज फिजिकल इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर दैट कैन withstand and that can cope up with the disaster that may get triggered. Similarly, we have come up with International Solar Alliance to promote solar power utilization and also create a mechanism, a market mechanism for solar energy push, because solar energy is relatively a new thing. There are additional costs involved in it, so you need to have a market mechanism to push the uptake or the usage of solar energy. Then third is infrastructure for resilient island states. See, there are many islands, small islands that has a risk of getting, we can say, submerged due to sea level rise. So despite not contributing to the emissions, they could be the first victim of climate change. So government of India has collaborated and has come up with infrastructure for resilient island states. Similarly, the fourth one is the Green Grids initiative on One Sun, One World and One Grid, that specifically aims to connect all the solar grids. See, sun does not set on earth. Irrespective, if it sets on in India, it may rise in some other place. So what if all the grids are connected? Then we'll have sustained supply of solar based electricity, and we won't be requiring batteries to you can say store for night usage. So the main idea is to connect grids, and that is why OSOWOG has been brought out, has been promoted by India. Now about the challenges that confront the Indian economy. The first challenge is global growth concern. See, what happened that when the world was seeing globalization or hyper globalization, the world was growing at 4 to 5%. The world growth was roughly 4% or 4.5%, and it was easier for developing countries like India to grow at 8%. But now it has been seen that the world is more moving towards deglobalization or protectionism, wherein the geo-economic fragmentation is taking place, where certain blocks are getting created and trade sanctions and certain groups are getting created which can hinder global growth, and in a way it may also hinder India's growth, because India's growth may also go down, because the exports may go down, and if exports may go down, it may lead to lower growth for India also. So the first concern is the global growth, which is getting fragmented. Then the second concern is energy security versus energy transition trade-off. That is all about cost benefit analysis. It is all about cost benefit analysis. See, it is everyone wants to transition to clean energy, but clean energy is basically expensive because R&D costs are there, and also the global supply chain is not streamlined, and that is leading to high cost, and economy of scale is not getting reached. So if a country like India tries to transition to those clean energy, it will lead to high energy costs, and that may undermine the development, the long-term development of India. So it's all about how to ensure economic growth with sustainability. India needs coal-based power plant. That is the need of hour, because energy intensity or energy per capita energy usage is directly related with the economic growth rate. Higher is the energy usage, more has been seen as the economic growth rate. And if we transition quickly to clean energy sources, it will add to more cost, and because India has a lower purchasing power, it will lead to a higher cost, and that may undermine the sustainability of growth in future. So there has to be a careful balance towards clean energy as well as economic growth that has to be taken place. And the third is artificial intelligence. Although artificial intelligence or AI is projected to create more jobs, but it has been seen that it is more about killing jobs in India, because India is more labor intensive, and AI has a potential to replace many manpower, and that may lead to mass unemployment in service sector. Because see, in industry it is very tough for AI until and unless we do not have robots. It will take more than 50 or 70 years to create an industrial robots that can, you can say, replace a normal humans in industries. But for automated service based task, it is easier to replace robots, it is easier to replace those humans. Like अभी हमारे पास chatbots होते हैं, chatbots ने कितने may I help you और कस्टमर सर्विसेज को उसने कितने ने रिप्लेस कर दिया. सिमिलरली बहुत से ऐसे ऐप्स आ रहे हैं जो डिजिटल मार्केटिंग और ये सब जितने भी इस तरह के नए जॉब्स हैं, दे आर किलिंग दोज जॉब्स, and that is service led, and that is leading to job losses. Even right now also in the past 1 year you must have seen कि बहुत से companies have started mass layoffs, and even the placements in this year's premier institutions are not higher, all because AI is replacing those jobs. Then human capital development and public health. So we need to have a sustained human capital development. To add to that, monitor public health also, because a healthy human is an asset. A healthy and skilled person is considered as human capital. So not only the skill that is important, but also health management has become equally important post COVID, because it has been seen that healthy workforce adds productivity to the economy. Now the outlook. So the outlook says, this is the last part of the document which has been brought out. It shows that India's nominal GDP ranking has improved from 10th rank to 5th rank. Earlier it was about 2 trillion USD. Now it has reached about 3.75 trillion USD. Economy, nominal GDP. That is nominal GDP. So that shows that, and it is projected to reach $7 trillion by 2030 and 35 trillion USD by 2047 and that is the main idea to make India a developed country by 2047. Developed country by 2047. That is the main idea and main aspiration for the government. At the same time, there is also a motivation to sustain the economic growth in the range of 7 to 8%. How? By declining ICOR, that is incremental capital output ratio. So it is basically how much capital is required to produce one more unit of output. So less is the capital required, it shows an efficient economy. Less capital required, it shows that the technological advancement and the skill and productivity of workforce is more. So what India needs? It needs sustainable economic development, but not only through more capital, but also through efficiency and productivity in the economy. Similarly, India tries to project itself as a favorable investment climate through favorable investment climate, so as to increase FDI and FPI to supplement the savings rate gap. So what is that? If there is so low savings rate and the economy wants to grow at a higher rate, it needs additional capital, and that capital has to be supplemented from foreign country in the form of FDI. So India tries to project itself as an investment friendly climate so that FDI can be attracted in India. Similarly, GST and other reforms has led to, like GST, the tax collection is hovering around rupees 1.6 lakh crore monthly. GST collection. Similarly, all the formalization in the economy that has taken place has also led to growing tax bases. So if more tax base increases, it is more for the government to collect taxes, and the more the government collect taxes, the government can spend more on various projects and various social sectors. That is the idea. And this way, this documents the Indian economy, a review, paints a detailed report card of the policies and results. So this was a review of the Indian economy in the past decade. How has it progressed, and what were the challenges, and what were the mistakes, and what were the learnings from it, and what is the outlook for India. And to add to that, we had discussed about various domains under which it was analyzed. So it was a more comprehensive report card, and this is what we have come up with the discussion. Thank you for this, and okay.